121 days. No arrest. No suspect. And now private investigators have entered the Nancy Guthrie case. The disappearance from Tucson, inside Pima County Sheriff's Department jurisdiction, has crossed a line most missing persons cases never reach. The doorbell camera captured a face. A reward exceeding $1 million sits untouched, and still nothing. What changed in the last 48 hours suggests this investigation may be entering a phase the public has not been told about. Because the mainstream version of this story is missing something critical. If you want every development in the Nancy Guthrie case as it breaks, follow now, because this story is still moving. The verified facts are narrow, and that narrowness matters. Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in Tucson. Inside that home, investigators documented what court filings describe as scenes consistent with an abduction. Outside the home, very little physical evidence.
A doorbell camera recorded an individual approaching the property, clothing, movement patterns, and a visible sportsman-style holster worn at the front of the body. More than 100 days have now passed. The Pima County Sheriff's Department continues to lead the investigation. The FBI is present, but coordination between the agencies has been described by sources close to the case as strained. Polygraph examinations were reportedly used early on to clear immediate family members. A reward in excess of $1,200,000 remains active. And the Guthrie family, by multiple accounts, has now retained private investigators, with reported expenditure approaching $500,000. But the evidence everyone has been focused on, it isn't the real problem. The real problem is the gap between what the crime scene shows and what the official investigation has produced.
The interior of the Nancy Guthrie home suggested a struggle. The exterior did not. The blood pattern inside was limited in a way that carries forensic weight. If a body is moved while the heart is no longer pumping, blood loss outside the original scene drops sharply. That single forensic observation is why one experienced investigator has maintained from the beginning that Nancy Guthrie was most likely deceased before she left the property. And if that assessment is correct, the search radius investigators should be working is not multi-state. It is within a 2-hour drive of the home. So why has the Pima County Sheriff's Department framed this as a multi-state investigation? Why was DNA evidence reportedly routed to a private laboratory rather than directly to the FBI facility at Quantico? Why were experienced violent crime investigators reportedly transferred out of the relevant unit before this case escalated? 3 procedural decisions, each one defensible in isolation. Together, they form a pattern that the Guthrie family appears no longer willing to wait on. By month 3, the public narrative was that the investigation was active, coordinated, and progressing. Tips were being processed. The task force, though reduced in size, remained operational. The reward was generating attention. Everything appeared to be moving. And then the family hired private investigators, not one, a team, with a budget reportedly nearing $500,000. Families do not commit that level of resource when they believe the official investigation is on track. They commit that level of resource when they have concluded something the public has not yet been told. Does the Guthrie family's reported $500,000 private investigation spend signal a loss of faith in the Pima County Sheriff's Department? Or does it signal the family knows something about the case that has not yet been made public? If the next filing changes what we just covered, you will want to be here for it. Consider what private investigators can actually do. They cannot obtain search warrants. They cannot subpoena records. They cannot compel testimony. They cannot make arrests. Those powers belong to law enforcement and the courts, and that has not changed. What private investigators can do is access proprietary information databases, develop sources, revisit witness statements, and apply singular focus to a single case. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is working dozens of investigations. A retained private investigator is working one, Nancy Guthrie. That is the asymmetry the Guthrie family has reportedly purchased. Step back from the courtroom-adjacent timeline for a moment. Consider what investigators knew at the scene versus what the public was told 6 weeks later. The space between those two things is where this entire case actually lives. The doorbell camera image alone should have produced a name, the clothing, the visible sportsman-style holster worn at the front of the body, a carry position professional weapons handlers consistently describe as impractical. The apparent surprise when the individual encountered the camera, followed by an attempt to obscure the lens with foliage taken from outside the property. That sequence describes someone who did not plan for a doorbell camera, someone who did not conduct adequate pre-surveillance, someone whose execution did not match the apparent intent. And yet, more than 100 days later, no arrest. There is a detail in the early investigative record that has not been adequately reconciled with the public timeline. Polygraph examinations were reportedly used to clear individuals connected to the family. But experienced homicide investigators have consistently maintained one principle on cases of this severity. No one is cleared until the correct suspect is in custody with overwhelming proof. The word cleared, used publicly this early in a case of this nature, is the kind of procedural language that defense counsel later uses to create reasonable doubt at trial. If the Pima County Sheriff's Department has formally cleared the family, the question becomes what evidentiary standard they applied, and whether that standard would survive courtroom scrutiny. For weeks, the operational position has been that the case is progressing through tip review, that the task force remains intact, that DNA analysis is underway, and that the reward will eventually fracture whatever loyalty protects the suspect. A reward exceeding $1,200,000 is by any measure a number large enough to break almost any criminal partnership. Drug-dependent informants have turned on associates for $50. The math, as one investigator described it, simply does not support continued silence. Unless there is no partnership to fracture, because if only one person carried out the abduction at the Nancy Guthrie residence, and multiple investigators with violent crime experience now believe exactly that, then the reward has no internal pressure point to exploit. There is no second party to turn. There is no fracture line. And every assumption built into the public-facing investigative strategy quietly collapses. That single conclusion reshapes the entire case. A single offender, acting alone, with sufficient pre-attack knowledge of the Nancy Guthrie residence to know she was home alone, to know the approach, to know the layout. That is not a random selection. The street structure around the home is hilly, irregular, and offers no obvious tactical advantage to a passing offender. A random nighttime approach to that specific residence in that specific neighborhood defies the logic of opportunistic crime, which means the offender knew Nancy Guthrie was there, which means the offender had information. 300 miles of desert sit within the 2-hour search radius experienced investigators have identified as the most probable disposition zone. And the investigative steps that would most likely produce a breakthrough are not exotic. Vehicle tracking data. Most modern vehicles retain location records that, by multiple expert accounts, cannot be fully disabled. Reverse keyword searches on the Nancy Guthrie home address through mapping platforms. records review of any tradespeople, delivery personnel, or service providers with prior access to the property, review of recent parole releases for violent offenders targeting women in the surrounding jurisdictions, a current will with revision history, additions, deletions, beneficiary changes that could establish or eliminate a financial motive. None of these investigative threads require federal authority the Pima County Sheriff's Department does not already possess. They require institutional discipline and time. Step back again. What the Guthrie family has purchased, with reported expenditure approaching $500,000, is not new authority. It is parallel attention, singular focus on a single name. But there is a separate pressure point building that the public has not been told about. The reward is not indefinite. Reward funds in cases of this scale operate on funding cycles, public attention cycles, and donor cycles. Every month that passes without an arrest erodes the financial pressure the reward was designed to apply. If the reward contracts before a tip surfaces, the single strongest external pressure on the offender disappears. And whoever is responsible for the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie may already understand that. The window in which a financial fracture is mathematically possible is not open forever. It is closing. This is what the Nancy Guthrie case actually reveals. A jurisdiction whose leadership has reportedly transferred experienced violent crime investigators out of the relevant unit. An interagency relationship with the FBI described by sources as strained. DNA evidence routed to a private laboratory rather than the federal facility with the deepest comparative database in the country. A family that has now spent close to $500,000 to do in parallel what the public expects its sheriff's department to be doing alone. The Nancy Guthrie case is no longer only about one missing woman in Tucson. It is about whether the institutional decisions made inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department in the first 100 days of this investigation can still be corrected, or whether the most important window has already closed. If this case matters to you, the next development is one you will not want to miss. Whether the procedural decisions made inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department during the first 100 days of the Nancy Guthrie investigation will be examined in the same way other agencies have been examined after high-profile abduction cases collapsed, and what that examination would reveal about the cases that came before this one in the same jurisdiction is a question the public record has not yet answered.